everyone. We are excited to have Dr. Sam Frank on with us today. He is the director of the Center of Excellence at the BIDMC. That's part of Harvard Healthcare System. And Sam also was just elected co-chair with Dr. Sandra Kostick of the HSG, which is really exciting. Sam's bio is incredibly long. He has been at this for a very long time with HD. So his full bio will be on the app, so you guys can go check him out. But for time purposes, we are going to jump right in when Katrina and I decided who would be the best to talk about a 3-year safety data study that was done by Austedo. Who better to ask than the original PI of the study from Austedo from the very beginning, and that was Dr. Sam Frank. And we are so thankful he said yes to this interview and going over some information with us. Dr. Sam Frank, thank you and welcome, and I will let you share your screen and get started.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really am thrilled to be talking about a medication that really does improve people's quality of life and addresses at least one of the symptoms related to Huntington's disease. And it's always important to get more efficacy and safety data out there. So I just have a few minutes to give some background, and then I'll get into the meat of what we wanted to talk about today. I think for this audience, I don't really need to go into this too much, but I know that there are many clinicians and regulators that still ask this question: why do we even need to treat chorea? And I think that it's really important to address quality of life, not only for the person with chorea, but for their caregiver as well. We certainly want to prevent injuries that can happen from chorea. Sometimes if we suppress chorea, that we can improve a person's ability to complete their activities of daily living. It's not clear that it improves function. I've heard many anecdotal stories, but I think that's hard to prove on a larger scale. And I think that there's still this notion that chorea is a cosmetic issue, and hope that with the years that we've had FDA-approved drugs, that we've shown that this is not the case. But there was this discussion. I was on an FDA panel before tetrabenazine, and there was a lot of discussion about whether tetrabenazine was even worth approving given the potential side effects. So that helped to pave the way. I'm going to talk a little bit about deuterium and deuterated compounds. Just want to make sure that people know that this is not a new compound. It was discovered in 1931, and it's really a form of hydrogen with an extra neutron. And when people hear about extra neutrons, they think about, is it radioactive? It is not radioactive. It's not toxic. In fact, it already comprises 1 to 2% of our hydrogen that's in our bodies. And so there are some scientists that have taken this compound, built it into pharmaceutical and different molecules, and made it into drugs, and said, can we improve the ability for drugs to help us? This is not a new concept either. And so this is just some of the drugs over time that have had deuteration as part of building a pharmaceutical. And so you can see that it dates back to 1961. Now, none of these made it to the market. And so deuterated tetrabenazine, or deutetrabenazine, or the brand name Austedo, is on the market as the first deuterated medication. And it became available in 2017. We all were very excited when this news became available, and it has really helped to move our field forward. And this was the study that, or one of the studies, I should say, that was submitted to the FDA, and we published it in JAMA in 2016, just showing the short-term 3-month exposure to this drug and the fact that it helps with chorea and is safe. And so we said 3 months is not how long people usually live with this process. And so we need to have people exposed to it for a longer time and see what happens from a safety and efficacy perspective. Now, just from the short term, and I just want to take a minute and explain that this is really the heart of the efficacy side of things. So this is the Unified Huntington's Disease Rating Scale, total maximal chorea score. And so the higher it is, that means the more chorea there is. So you can see when people were put on the drug that their chorea score reduced. So they had less chorea when they were exposed to the drug. There was a little reduction with placebo as well, but not as nearly as much. And it was statistically significant, meaning that it wasn't due to chance that there was a reduction in chorea. And so keep this graph in mind as I go through some things. This was the safety in terms of the short-term study, first HD, that was published in 2016. And you can see that the adverse events, which is what we call side effects in the context of a clinical trial, were pretty minimal. People who are on the deutetrabenazine had a little bit more sleepiness and GI side effects more than anything. those generally resolved. And I'm thrilled to be here because this is the study that was just published. And this is the safety of deutetrabenazine chorea in HD. And it's a longer term study. What happens when people are exposed to this medication over more time? Now, this was not just the people that were in first HD, the study I just told you about. That was a good number of people. That was 82 people that successfully completed first HD. And they had been exposed to the drug or to placebo for 12 weeks. And we didn't know what they were on. We had visit where they were 1 week off of the drug. So everyone needed to be retitrated up to where they needed to be to suppress their chorea. So that was part of the group that was in the study. The other half is what we call the switch cohort. So these were people that were on stable doses of tetrabenazine for a number of weeks, and sometimes it was years that they were on it. And they overnight, we switched them from tetrabenazine to Austedo. And it was about a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of the dosing. So if they were on 10 milligrams of tetrabenazine, then we put them on 5 milligrams of deutetrabenazine. So that was the switch that was made. And there were 37 people in that arm. The range of dosing in first HD was up to 48 milligrams, and that's what's in the label. One of the reasons we did this study is to say, what happens when we push the dose? Can we suppress chorea further and safely? And so we went up to 72 milligrams a day. The lowest dose that people could be on was 6 milligrams. And so you can see the people that were on tetrabenazine, their average dose was 42 milligrams. And we converted that in half to about 20 milligrams. And over time, they increased because we were able to further reduce the amount of chorea that they had, and they didn't run into side effects when we did that. When we looked at the average dose across everyone, after the titration phase, it was about 37 milligrams. And at the end of the visit, after 3 years, people on average were on 45 milligrams. And it was pretty well tolerated too. There's no placebo to compare this to, so it's just what's out there. And so you can see this is what happened. There was more than 4% of people in either cohort that had any side effect. And you can see that it's a pretty consistent list with what we see, A, with Huntington's disease, and B, in previous studies. So there was nothing that was unexpected with these side effects, adverse effects that were noticed. And this is really what we wanted to look at, was how well does it work over time in terms of suppressing chorea. And you can see that the lighter green was the switch cohort and the darker green is the rollover cohort. So the people that were already on tetrabenazine, we switched them. That was the switch. And rollover, they were in the first and they roll over into the open label. And the rollover cohort was titrated up. So you can see that drop at the beginning, and everyone with switch, you can see that even though they were on adequate doses of tetrabenazine, or so they thought, to suppress their chorea, we got even better control of their chorea. And there was consistent control of chorea over about 3 years. So that was exciting to see that we were able to suppress chorea and do it in a relatively safe manner. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and take a few questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frank, for doing. I just have a question, and it may be putting you on the spot. You absolutely do not have to answer it, but I do have a question, because when we hear a lot about benazine, Austedo, and tetrabenazine, we do hear people about having adverse effects, but they usually say it very lightly, right? Oh, I become more tired or something. But the one that seems to be the talk of everything is suicide ideation. Suicide is so prevalent in our community because the features of the disease. And I understand safety, that the FDA has to put black box on if an effect like that happens. But did you see, or should there be a study done, if there was a huge increase of suicide when Xenazine was released, and then when Austedo was released, did HD suicide go through the roof?
It's obviously a really important question for this population in general, and especially when we're talking about a medication that reduces dopamine effect. That's what these drugs do. That's why one of the reasons that it may reduce chorea, that you can increase depression. We did see depression in about 20% of people on tetrabenazine, but we really did not see depression above and beyond what was expected in the population when people were on tetrabenazine. And so part of the reason that the drug got the approval so quickly is that they didn't have to go back and do all the basic studies in the lab, that because they used some of the data with tetrabenazine, because the molecules are so similar. There's just deuterium in 6 places on deutetrabenazine. So I think it's an important question to look did the rate of suicide go up in the Huntington's disease population after each of these drugs were put on the market and used? I don't think anybody's done that. I don't know if that's going to be convincing enough to the FDA to reduce the black box warning, because it usually takes a lot more than that, but certainly worth looking at.
Thank you.
Dr. Frank, my question is related to the last chart that you shared. Katie and I, when we were looking over the safety data, we just noticed some interesting points. And so I took a couple of notes because I wanted to make sure that I have the appropriate timeframes there. But so slightly between like week 67 and 80, there was like a slight in the chart scores with the TMC scores.
Okay.
But then also there was like an opposite trajectory between the different groups, right? Between like week 132 and 145. And it was almost like opposite direction. And so we were just kind of wondering if that happened to do with like dosage changes or even like participant numbers changing, if anyone had to drop out of the trial or anything like that, or something entirely different. We were just interested in those chart displays.
Yeah, I think that there's a natural variability and fluctuation in chorea. We know that. It's one of the reasons that in the first study, we actually looked at an average at the beginning and compared that to an average at the end. And so what you're seeing in that last chart was just a single time point in terms of measurement of chorea over 3 years. And so there's going to be some natural variability. That's what those error bars were around there too. But I think even accounting for that, there's some natural variability there. And yes, you're right. There was some dropout, but most people stayed in the study. So it wasn't just because of dropout. Most people did stay in the study. We had a very high retention rate. It was around 80%, which is pretty impressive for a 3-year study.
Yeah, that was
really is.
Noticed. Yeah, we were shocked. We were shocked that people stayed that long in the study.
I think it says A, that there's a problem that they're having that's being addressed, and B, there aren't side effects that are significant enough for them to stop taking the drug.
Right.
And so we talk about quality of life, even with these adverse effects, that people felt like their quality of life with having their chorea managed was worth staying in the study. So do you think that it would be something in the future that maybe even not safety, but really watching people who have been on Austedo for a long period of time, talking about them doing like a possible their quality of life and how they feel about their quality of life in long term of being on this drug?
This study is done, and we did look at some quality of life measures as part of it. We really focused on that in the short term because we wanted to see if there was a dramatic change in terms of their chorea. Did that have a more measurable impact in terms of their quality of life? But there is plenty of research going on right now looking at quality of life in general in terms of Huntington's disease. And I think different impacts on that quality of life and functioning is driven not only from the patient community, but from the regulatory bodies as well. They want to make sure that we're not just suppressing chorea, that we're suppressing chorea and it's helping to improve quality of life. I think that's true for just about any medication that's in development now. We need to make sure that we're not just changing a lab value or changing one measure on something, but we're having an impact on people's daily lives.
Yeah, and I'll let Katrina ask the last question, but I do have to say it's interesting. I think even a caregiver quality of life, because I know if my husband's chorea would have been a little bit better managed, the public impact for me and the kids would have been so much easier for us to deal with. So we're talking about a whole family quality of life, right?
Absolutely. It's absolutely a family disease, and this is no exception.
And even when it comes down to eating food, the difference that it makes in your daily activities is just, chorea is looked at as just movements sometimes. And so when you look at it, how it even affects esophagus and digestion and things like that, outside of the box thinking, but it really does improve the quality of our loved ones.
It's not outside the box at all. And when someone has trunk chorea, they ingest air and it impacts their trunk, it impacts their whole digestive and respiratory system. So something that we see every day.
Thank you. Thank you for that. This one's a little bit, again, outside of the box. I guess that term's what we're going with today. But we've heard in the community about people being on Austedo who have the diagnosis of juvenile onset Huntington's disease. Now, is that becoming a little more common that you're seeing? And we're just wondering if that's something that's been used by doctors because they feel like it's a good fit, or if this is mainly adults and above with juvenile onset, or if you've heard of minors on this drug.
So first, I should say that the hospital I'm at, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, is an adult-only hospital, but we do partner with Boston Children's Hospital across the street. But I don't see too many kids, and I don't have too many patients with juvenile onset, and I haven't tried it in my patients with more Westphal variant, the more slow, stiff variant of Huntington's disease. But what we did see in first HD is that there was a reduction in dystonia, which was not expected, and that you tend to see more of that in the juvenile onset population. And we saw weight gain, which is also something that's really important in patients with Huntington's disease, since weight loss is such an issue. So I can see why, and I have tried this in some of my other patients, that just because they don't have chorea, if there are some other issues that potentially could benefit from this drug, to try it. Now, if you look at the decades of literature of using VMAT2 inhibitors, that's reserpine, tetrabenazine, and more recently, deutetrabenazine and valbenazine, these have been used not just in chorea, but also in dystonia, in myoclonus, and in many other movements that are an excess movement type of disorder. And so I can see why people might try it. I don't think it's been formally studied, but certainly, again, another population and use that's worth investigating for some of these non-chorea benefits potentially.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for coming on and doing this with us.